Today, I'm in Milford, Ohio. Let's check it out. This is part one of my series on Milford. Check out the others for the full story. Milford sits along the Little Miami River, just upstream of where the East Fork flows in to join it. It grew up around the first safe fording point on the river north of the Ohio, and that ford is the whole reason the town exists. The name itself is a contraction of mill and ford. Somebody's saying you can cross by the Mills Ford often enough that it wore down to you can cross at Milford. The story goes back to 1788 when Revolutionary War veteran John Nancaro had the area surveyed, convinced it would become the future metropolis of the West. That title ended up going a little to the southwest to a town first called Louisville. We now call it Cincinnati. Then in 1796, another Revolutionary War veteran, the Reverend Francis McCormick, arrived holding a 1,000-acre land grant for his service to Virginia and built his log cabin on the hill at what's now 1000 Forest Avenue. His original cabin still stands buried beneath years of additions to the home. The next year, he made history without knowing it. In 1797, McCormick founded the first Methodist Class in the Northwest Territory, making Milford a root of Methodism in the West before Ohio was even a state. The land changed hands from there. Nancaro sold his 230 acres to Philip Gatch in 1802. Gatch sold 125 of them to Ambrose Ransom in 1806, and Ransom sold about half of that to John Hagman, and Hagman is where the town really begins. He called this valley Hagman's Mills and laid out a village of 46 lots. The most expensive, lot number 1, went for the grand sum of $35 at the corner of Mill and Water Streets. You can still stand on that spot today. The corner is now home to Cincinnati Distilling and Nation Kitchen and Bar. Water power is what made the place grow. Hagman built a crude grist mill in 1803. And by around 1805, Ethan Stone of Cincinnati was running an oil mill. The name Milford was turning up in newspapers by 1806 and in common use by 1811. In 1815, a wooden-covered toll bridge, the Kissing Bridge, was authorized and finished by 1818. Covered bridges were often called kissing bridges because a young man in a horse and buggy would stop halfway across where it was quiet and no one could see it and steal a kiss from his sweetheart. Its effect on travel and trade was so dramatic that other towns started clamoring for bridges of their own. And on January 23, 1836, Milford was formally incorporated as a village. Then came the railroad. On December 14, 1841, the first passenger train on the Little Miami Railroad reached Milford, pulled by a locomotive named Governor Morrow. The run from Cincinnati took about an hour. Just like that, Milford was open for business on a much larger scale. That boom coincided with the height of the town's milling, distilling, and pork packing, much of it owned and run by John Kugler, and it brought schooling beyond the basics too, with the Milford Seminary and the short-lived Milford Academy. The old covered Kissing Bridge gave way to a steel span in 1894, and the early 1900s brought interurban rail and electricity straight down Main Street, turning Milford into a bedroom community and summer getaway for people living and working in Cincinnati. Here's a fun fact of the time. In 1906, the CM&L Traction Company laid tracks up the middle of Main Street, running all the way from Cincinnati to Blanchester, and the village bought its electricity from the Traction Company's powerhouse. Every night, around midnight, when the last car returned to the station, they'd shut the power off. Every morning when the first car rolled out, the lights came back on. High on a promontory, on about 5 acres overlooking Milford and the Little Miami River, sits a house that was called the finest in Clermont County the day it was finished. This is Promont. Construction started in 1865 and wrapped up in 1867, built with materials imported from Europe by the finest craftsmen in the area. It was raised by William McGrew, but the name it's tied to is John Pattison, who lived here from 1879 until his death in the house in 1906. Pattison became the 43rd governor of Ohio, and his is one of the most tragic stories in Ohio political history. I tell the whole thing in its own video, so look for Ohio's Shortest Governor on my page. Promont is a textbook example of Italianate Victorian, wide eaves, decorative coins at the corners, and those distinctive Italianate windows. Its 4-story tower gives panoramic views of the whole valley, and it's that tower that gives the house its signature silhouette, the one that's come to define Milford itself across the generations. Inside, a central hall opens to 2 connecting rooms on each side, with a large stained glass window on the front stairway and Italian marble fireplaces. This was clearly not a house built for the common person of the day, but the feature that really gives away the money? The plumbing. 2 cisterns up on the top floor caught rainwater, which was then heated and used for bathwater. And the best part for anyone who loves old houses, the structure has never been altered from its original construction. So while the interior has been restored to its Victorian-era look, the bones of the place are essentially the same ones that stood here in the late 1860s. Promont stayed a private residence for well over a century, until the early 1980s, when it was given to the Greater Milford Area Historical Society. Today it's a museum and the Society's headquarters, restored to that Victorian appearance, and you can even rent it for weddings and events. Shout out to Julie and Joe, whose beautiful wedding I got to attend right here at Promont. The story of Milford's many Kugler Stone Buildings starts in 1794, when Christian Waldschmidt crossed the Allegheny Mountains and floated down the Ohio River by flatboat. He stopped at the mouth of the Little Miami, explored the area, and liked it enough to go to Cincinnati and buy over 1,000 acres along the river. Within 2 years, 20 families had joined him in a settlement they called New Germany, present-day Camp Dennison. I'll be covering Camp Dennison and Miamiville in a separate video, so I'll leave the settlement story there and introduce you to the Kuglers. In 1797, Matthias Kugler moved to New Germany with his family. He went to work for Waldschmidt and fell for the boss's daughter, Catherine Elizabeth. They married the next year in 1798. When Christian Waldschmidt and his son both died in 1814, his businesses and his considerable wealth passed to his son-in-law, Matthias Kugler. Then in 1828, fire destroyed most of the mills in the distillery in New Germany, though the paper mill was spared. Shortly after, Matthias' son John became a full partner in the family business, Kugler & Sons, and that's when they bought the Pearson & Pearson mill in Milford, sitting on lot number 1. Matthias and Catherine stayed in New Germany, while John and his wife Matilda moved to Milford, which let the family run both mills at once, a few miles apart. The Milford operation grew fast. The very year they moved to town, they bought a distillery, a tannery, and a shoe shop, and by 1830 they were in the meat packing business too. John raised pigs on his farms in South Milford. Farmers sold the Kuglers logs, hogs, corn, rye, wheat, and hemp. The mills and distilleries turned the raw materials into products and shipped it down to Cincinnati to sell. So let's talk about a few of these buildings and why they're all made of stone. It comes down to a bridge that was never built. John Kugler had excavated a large amount of stone to build his own toll-free bridge across the river, but the project fell through. With all that stone already gathered, he put it to use, raising these buildings to store his distillery and mill products. Clustered mostly around where Mill, Water, and Main Streets meet, they still define the downtown streetscape today. The long stone building here at the corner of Main and Mill was the whiskey warehouse, with a cooperage, a barrel-making shop up on the second floor. Construction began in 1860 and finished in 1862. Today it holds a number of local businesses. The distillery at 220 Mill Street, built around 1850. This one replaced a frame distillery that had burned in the late 1840s. And the corn warehouse right next door, built in 1840. The distillery business was booming, and they needed both grain and a place to store it. The old library, built in 1860, is a warehouse with a public meeting space on the second floor. Kugler's own stone stable is now part of Cincinnati Distilling, a fitting connection that ties the building straight back to the Kugler distilling trade. The Kugler empire in Milford is hard to overstate, and it ended almost overnight. In 1868, the year John Kugler died. After his death, every operation but the mill shut down, but his mark on the town, set in stone, has outlasted him by more than a century and a half. At the corner of Garfield and High Streets sits a property that once belonged to Robert Hare, one of Milford's finer historic homes, known either as Rose Lawn, the name it carried as a tea room, or the Old Milford Inn. For many years, it was home to Dolly Spencer, who holds a genuine historic distinction in Milford and maybe beyond it. Spencer is one of the most widely known women in Clermont County for her civic and social work. She founded the Milford Progress Club, took a leading role in the Clermont County Federation of Women's Clubs and the Ohio Newspaper Women's Association, served as an officer in the Clermont County Probate Court, and opened her home to girls from Cincinnati who needed somewhere to vacation. She was also known all over the county for the beautiful gardens she kept at Roselawn. All of that would be enough, but the thing most attached to her name is this. In 1921, she ran for mayor of Milford, and she may well have been the first woman ever to do so here. The 19th Amendment had only been ratified in August of 1920, so Spencer was running in one of the very first elections in which women across the country could actually vote. She was part of the first national wave of women candidates in the 1920s. Now, women had run before, and even won mayor's offices before her. Kansas had granted women municipal suffrage decades earlier, and a woman was elected mayor in Kansas as far back as 1887. So she wasn't the first in the nation, but for Milford and the first post-suffrage moment, she was a genuine pioneer. Dolly Spencer died just a few years later in 1926, and her house has stood on the rise just above downtown ever since, a reminder of her remarkable life.